Even as we tired, we tried, that will forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division.
Good afternoon and happy Black History Month. I am Roland Smith, Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and Adjunct Professor here at Rice University. I also oversee the MultiCultural Center. And I want to welcome you to today's conversation, and I hope you'll find it meaningful. Full disclosure, I have known two of our speakers for some time. I'll let them decide whether they want to divulge our connection. But I hope you will also be on the lookout for future programming for the MCC. At this time, I want to thank Dr. Ijama Wogu, the Associate Director for Planning for the MCC, Mr. Ciola Curley, the MCC Assistant Director, and our student fellows for their hard work in operating the MCC in these virtual spaces. As I contemplate the horrific events of the past several years, up to and including those of 2020 and January 21st, 2021. I am reminded of the words of author, scholar Ibram X. Kendi. Racist ideas love believers, not thinkers. Racist ideas love thinkers, love believers, not thinkers. With that said, I'll now turn the program over to Dr. Wogu.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this afternoon program. I am Dr. Ijama Wogu. I'm the Associate Director for the MultiCultural Center here at Rice University with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. For this program, This is America, we'll be discussing the Black Lives Matter movement in light of the insurrection at the Capitol. We had over 300 people register for this program, which speaks to the importance of exploring this topic. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors for this program, Dr. Anthony Pinn and the Center for Engaged Research and Collaborative Learning, for partnering with us to make this dialogue possible. The format for this gathering today is to hear from our distinguished group of panelists. And throughout this engagement, I encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A section. Okay, so when submitting your questions, we ask that you submit direct questions for the panelists. We request this because it can become a bit of a challenge to find questions if it's embedded within comments. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. I'd like to briefly share a bit about them. First, we have Kandice Webber. Kandice is a registered nurse and she has served the greater Houston area for almost 20 years. She's a co-chair of Houston's March for Black Women, excuse me. She is also a lead organizer for Black Lives Matter Houston. Kandice is an advocate for educational equity and believes that our greatest weapon to combat systemic racism and white supremacy is education. Kandice recognizes the political power that women hold and is focused on uplifting the power and increasing civic and political engagement. We welcome you, Kandice. Next, we have Brandon Mack. He's a community activist and sociologist who's dedicated to issues related to the intersections of race, gender, and sexual orientation. Brandon is a lead organizer with Black Lives Matter Houston as well. He has conducted research on effemophobia, the negativity related to effeminate gay men. His work has been featured in GLAAD Media award-winning article, and he has presented his work at national conferences, such as the National LGBTQ Task Force. We welcome you, Brandon. Next, we have Dr. Cleve Tinsley. Dr. Tinsley is a scholar of religion and Africana studies. He earned his MA and PhD in religion here at Rice University in 2019. Dr. Tinsley's research seeks to uncover the religious meanings of and significance of a variety of African-American formations and movements, including the Black Lives Matter movement here in Houston. Dr. Tinsley is currently an assistant professor at Virginia Union University, where he has been appointed as the executive director of the Center for African American History and Culture. Dr. Tinsley is also a non-resident research fellow with the Religion and Public Life program at Rice University, supporting group research and interventions at the intersections of race and religion. We welcome you, Dr. Tinsley. So I'm thrilled today for our panelists to speak about today's topic. With that, I'd like to ask each of you, Dr. Tinsley, Ms. Webber, and Mr. Mack, to start off with sharing your key thoughts around the Black Lives Matter movement in light of the Capitol Insurrection. As you speak, feel free to share any insights about racial justice and liberation in our country, the insurrection's relevance to the call for police reform, or any other important lessons we can gather from the recent event on January 6th.
I'll be happy to start. First, I want to start out with what this movement means to me. The Black Lives Matter movement, it's life, right? It's that simple. We do what we do because we have to protect the existence of Black life by any means necessary. Without the movement, I fear that little Black girls and little Black boys would sit and wonder about their value, about the need for the continuance of our communities, and just lack the ability to identify people that look like them, that are willing to fight for them. The Black Lives Matter movement it means everything to me. With that in mind, to see what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, this uprising of treason, okay, this mob of traitors, because we need to call a thing a thing. It is very important. When you see racism, you call it racism. When you see white supremacy, you call it white supremacy. You know, this was a mob of traitors on January 6th. To see how they were handled by the police, to see the narrative that has been swarmed around these traitors, it is very disheartening, but it is not surprising. This is white supremacy in action, you know? White supremacy forms the narrative. The media is driven by white supremacy ideology. You know, this is America. So America doesn't want to do anything that makes whiteness look unappealing and not superior. This call for unity that's happening right now, and you know, this call for unity is not only coming from the Republican side, this call for unity is coming from the Democratic side too. Why? Because whiteness is whiteness. It doesn't matter whether you think you identify with the red or the blue. If you're white, and whiteness prevails. It's just some people are out loud with it, and some people decide, you know, they want to be a little bit more covert. So these calls for unity are irresponsible and feeds more into white supremacy. If there is no unity until there is accountability, there is no unity until there is true action towards equity, not just equality. Equality is not enough. I'm talking about equity for Black people. You can forget about unity. I'm not even pushing unity. That is a farce. I don't want it until you treat me as I think I should be treated. There is no unity, and I'm not going to tell any Black person or brown person that they should settle for a call for unity until we get what we want. All we want is to live. That's really it.
Thank you.
So go ahead, Dr. Tinsley, go for it.
No, please, Mr. Mack, go ahead.
So first and foremost, thank you so much for creating this space, because we have got to talk about where we are currently as a country. So I'm going to start with January 6th, because when I saw what happened on January 6th, to me, that is the culmination of hundreds upon hundreds of years of white supremacy and white privilege going unchecked. As someone who has been a part of the Black Lives Matter movement here in Houston for the last 8 years, I can definitively tell you that if those individuals were Black, we would not have even made it to the steps of the Capitol. Because when we protest, and you don't even have to use the word peaceful, because protest is inherently peaceful. When we protest, we automatically are perceived as dangerous and automatically perceived as negative because the United States of America has fundamentally had a problem with the valuation of Black life. You have to remember that we started out as property. And the first police forces that started out in this country were slave catchers. So this history of mistreatment towards Black people has started from the inception in this country and has perpetuated to what you saw on January 6th, to where you have individuals who consider themselves to be patriots being guided in to the Capitol, allowed to do what they do and take selfies with the police. So inherently, what you saw on January 6th is what has been going on in this country from the beginning, in that white supremacy and white privilege goes unchecked. And what we're now seeing in the aftermath is the continuing perpetuation of that uncheckedness. We're seeing individuals who are involved in that getting food that wouldn't be accessible to Black inmates. We're seeing elected officials not being held accountable. Marjorie Taylor Greene, nothing's happening to her. Nothing's going to happen to her. So once again, even our federal government is unchecking elected officials who work for all of us and not holding them accountable. So Black Lives Matter, as I like to say it, and I'm going to say this in Marvel terms so that we all understand, Black Lives Matter is Black Panther, and we are creating Wakanda in a world that centers Captain America. And we are not going to stand for it anymore. So what I need people to understand is, for me, fundamentally, Black Lives Matter is three things. It is a declaration and a simple declarative statement. Black Lives Matter, period. Nothing comes after it. There is no and, or. You fundamentally believe that Black Lives Matter. And if you fundamentally believe that Black Lives Matter, you have to take the action and steps that demonstrate just that. It is never enough just to simply say it. It is in the actions and steps that you are taking to demonstrate that. So are you making places and spaces more equitable for Black people? Are you challenging systemic oppressions? Are you seeing something and saying something? Because racism is a problem that Black people did not create. Racism is a problem that white people created. And white people have to be the ones who fix it. Now, we operate within it, but once again, we're creating our own spaces and places and Wakanda to be and breathe in a space that wasn't set up for us. Secondly, it is an organization. Now, the thing that we all need to understand, Black Lives Matter does not operate in a traditional organizational structure, and that's on purpose because organizational structures were not created with Black people in mind. And we don't want to maintain those same structures. So you're going to see multiple organizations that are going to use Black Lives Matter, say Black Lives Matter, but that is with intention because we all have different ways of operating, and because we all need to operate differently in order to dismantle this thing that is systemic oppression and racism. And it is a movement. This is not a moment. This is going to be continuous. So you're going to keep seeing us, and we're going to still be here. And it is going to take all of us collectively to break this thing down. But if you were bothered and are here today because of what you saw by January 6th, my question to you is, what are you going to do about it? Because we all have a part to play. We can't just sit back and just say, oh, that was bad. It's been bad. And it's been bad for hundreds of years. But we're not going to sit back anymore. We're going to do something, and Black Lives Matter Houston and all other organizations and people who are deeply committed to dismantling systemic oppressions and racism, we're going to create Wakanda here in the United States and all over the world.
Thank you, Mr. Mack. Dr. Tinsley?
Sure. First, thank the organizers. It's an honor to be here with you today, along with our esteemed panelists. I have comments around 3 areas. One, I know we're using January 6th as a cultural touch point to talk about Black movements, Black Lives Matters, and white movements in general. I first like to start by saying the 2 movements, at least in substance and in political and social strategy, are not comparable, meaning, one is a kind of demonstration of white rage, right? Versus a kind of express types of trauma, but also action by, specifically speaking of the Black working poor, as it relates to movements and expressions of this kind of rage that exists. If we were to follow folks like Baldwin, who talks about to be Black, is to kind of always walk around with a kind of tacit rage in mind. But as it relates to kind of what this moment kind of recognizes, I think the Black Lives Matter movements and its meaning really kind of signifies a different moment in Black freedom struggle. It's a part of the radical Black political tradition and how these movements have been shaped over time. Scholars after the Civil Rights era often ask these questions about what does the post-Civil Rights era look like? And I think what both Brandon and Kandice have alluded to is, one, we can't devalue the kind of moral significance of the Black Lives Matter movements, meaning the democratization of power, who leads and who gets visibility. Also, this notion of doing coalitional work, like Brandon just mentioned. Oftentimes there are intramural struggles, right? We don't all have the same visions. There are competing visions of how we should live our Black life. And even within the Black Lives Matter movement, that always disagree. There can be disagreement between groups. Fundamentally, though, all of us have the right aim, though, right? The aim is more liberation and movement for Black bodies. We've always been controlled, whether it's slavery and segregation. The kind of control and domination of Black bodies has always been at the forefront. What I like to say is what the Capitol Insurrection showed is different responses to community grievances, though, right? I mean, white power has never been afraid of state, right? The state acts in certain ways toward Black bodies in ways it doesn't act toward white bodies. And so we saw the great brashness with which they were able to climb Capitol steps, break in certain offices. We saw police helping different folks. And it's a commentary on white supremacy's power in this country and the ways that whites have been able to execute their kind of demands for entitlement in face of no matter what. And so I think this movement and this life first points to a new epic. If we point back to this past summer of rebellion, we saw Black Lives Matter activists organizing all across this country and across the globe. But even since 2012 and Trayvon Martin, 2014, when it gained its most prominence, and I don't want to miss out on locally there in Houston, Sandra Bland in 2015, right? And how these activists and organizers you see on the screen with us today were definitely involved with those kind of movements. So I just think January 6th is just a signaling touching point of how the different reactions are to how these movements begin to express themselves. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement holds a lot of possibilities as it relates to different people being involved in these kinds of struggles. So they're important lessons, and I'll talk about more later on if we have more room. But I just think the Black Lives Matter movement at this time is a time for us to be able to signal how can we move forward? How can we build coalitions together to kind of create change and social improvement?
Great. Thank you so much for all of your opening thoughts. And I'd like to turn to the audience for any questions you may have. I certainly encourage you to submit your questions at this time, any questions you may have for the panelists. We do have one question here, and I'll read it to you all. It says, this individual is an anonymous person who submitted a question, curious to hear about the panelists' thoughts on what unity could actually look like. Not just all getting along or moving forward, but politically, how to bring about those actions of equality and equity that even make a better future for all, especially people of color, possible.
So first of all, we need to understand that this fight for Black liberation is not going to be won in any one place, right? So it's going to take action in the street, action in neighborhoods, action in policy, action in politics, you know, and those actions, there has to be space made for people of color. And, you know, let me just say this people of color thing. You know, I know it's a catchy phrase. I'm just gonna talk real honest. I'm Black. So I support everybody else's struggle. I can only speak freely and truthfully to mine. So you gotta move out of Black people's way in order for things to change. And there is unity is the end result, you know, of a very long equation. So first, recognize white supremacy, recognize the way white supremacy moves, the way it operates in day-to-day life, and gain a better understanding of why we're not happy about that. What happened on January 6th was just the evidence of how white supremacy works, how white supremacy moves in political spaces. Now, it was couched as election fraud and things like that. But really what January 6th was white people don't think that they should lose. And they were pissed off because they did, especially the white male patriarchy. White men fail up, they don't fail. So this was a reaction. Like these people have been emboldened through laws, through policy, through legislature to believe that they are superior. So until we put Black people in positions to create equity in laws, to create equity in policy, to create equity in opportunities, in economics, in development, there is not going to be any change. So if what we're looking for is unity, that means that white people, you can do one thing: recognize that you're racist. Recognize that your life looks the way it does because of white supremacy. Now, that doesn't mean you didn't study for your test. That doesn't mean that you didn't work hard, dream hard for all the things that you've got. But what it does mean is your work, you can guarantee, will pay off. Black people don't have that opportunity, no matter how hard we work. These industrial complexes, whether it be the prison industrial complex, educational industrial complex, the healthcare complex, all of these things are working the way they should. And the way they are intended to work means Black and brown children don't get the education that white kids get. Black people do not get the healthcare that white people get. Black people are incarcerated at much larger rates than white people. These are the way these industrial complexes are meant to work. So that is what we want undone. I don't care about your feelings. White people can feel however they want to feel about me. But as long as my Black body can get up, leave my house, and have the opportunities that I rightfully deserve, I'm cool. Until, you know, as long as I have those things, you know, I'm not asking anybody to feel any kind of way about me. I'm asking everybody to move out of my way so I can make a life for myself and for my family. When those things start happening, we can talk about unity. But until those things start happening, just take that word right out your mouth when we're talking about Black lives. I'm not going to even entertain it, because it is the answer to an equation that we can't even get people to acknowledge. You want unity? Work for it. That's white people's work. That ain't my work. This is not my work. So.
Thank you. Any other panelists like to chime in regards to this question about unity?
Yeah, I mean, so from my perspective, I'd say oftentimes I think we're missing the point when we talk about notions of unity. From my perspective, there's not much hope from my perspective for ideological unity, meaning all of us to get on the same page as it relates to how we think about these moral and political orientations. I think of unity as more coalitional in nature, what means by this: different organizations and institutions trying to combine to make more room and liberation for Black people to move in this world, right? And so unity as it relates to, we don't have to agree philosophically on certain matters, but what you can do is be willing to analyze and dismantle the power arrangements in which Black folks are caught up in. And if you're able to kind of then use your resources or your institutional leverage and power to create room for more expression, more movement, more ascendancy among Black and Indigenous folks, then let that be your starting place for trying to think about unity. As far as I'm perspective, there's a popular organizer, Adrienne Marie Brown, who talks about fractals, and really unity is more fractal in nature, meaning unity is something you discuss amongst your family members, amongst those who are closest to you, those who are willing to dwell with you for a long time. In our mosques, in our institutions, you all can have smaller conversations about unity, but in a larger social political realm and struggling for more liberation for Black folk, just think about how you can divest of different power arrangements or how you can make these arrangements more palatable for our movement and freedom.
I'll just say it very quickly for me, because once again, it goes back to what I say is the fundamental problem, is that we don't value each other. So for me, unity will be achieved when Black trans folk can be and breathe. When we see the valuation of each other and to the point where we're actually dismantling the criminal justice system, dismantling the healthcare system, dismantling the educational system to where we're not seeing inequality fundamentally in certain areas because they're heavily Black and brown, and because Black and brown people are dealing with all these disparities that come from lack and then perpetuate themselves. When we start doing interventions in those spaces, that's when you can create unity. And it is in that coalition work and in the other things that the other panelists have talked about that you will see the unity.
Thank you.
If I could just touch on that for one more second,
Please,
I believe
yes.
100% in the coalition work. And I think my brothers here are spot on. But it cannot go without being said, and it cannot be said enough, that in coalition work, Black people decide the issues. We decide where we want to go, how we see these issues being resolved. And in coalition with Black people, use your resources, use your platforms and things like that to help that become a realization in the Black community. But do not think that in coalition work, in coalition building, non-Black or non-marginalized people get to set the pace. You know, that is something that needs to be remembered. You cannot come in my neighborhood and tell me about the problems in my neighborhood. But if you are truly concerned about my neighborhood, then you will be invited and you will come to listen, not to talk. And then we devise a plan on how to make things better.
Thank you. There is a question here. Will this recording be available for rewatch? Absolutely. If you did register for this program, you will get an email of the recording. Okay. Next question. Someone says, thank you for discussing unity. It has been on my mind these days. Okay, great. Would like to have your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement being nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize by a Norwegian MP, Peter Ade, hope I'm saying that correctly, and emphasizing the peaceful nature of the Black Lives Matter movement, pushing back on the media's narrative of the BLM movement as violent and fascist. This is significant as the BLM movement was almost outcasted and shunned as recently as last year by many public figures. I'm not sure if there's a question, just general thoughts.
So I think it's great because once again, Black Lives Matter is not just the United States. This is a worldwide movement. So for me, that is the thing that is positive about seeing the nomination, is because once again, it's a recognition that this is a worldwide issue, because anti-Blackness is a worldwide problem. But as far as the narratives and things of that nature, people are always going to try to use the media to discount something that they know is legitimate. And so for me, that's the reason for why I don't give in to what the media has to say, because we know the truth. And for anyone who has ever been to a Black Lives Matter protest in Houston or worldwide, you know good and well that our intentions are to be there to talk about the issue, to center Black people, and violence is not a part of it.
I want to also add that if you think just because the movement has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, first of all, that was hard work and it is well deserved. But also, I just want to add that Black Lives Matter is still shunned. Okay, so this Nobel Prize, it's great, right? This nomination, it's great. It's a beautiful thing to recognize the work, and not just the work of, people that end up on panels and end up on TV talking about. I'm talking about, this is the recognition of the work of single Black mothers who work 60 hours a week and still that one day they have off are in community, coming up with better ways for our children to be safe in our communities without being overrun with cops. This movement is, that single father or that young man that looks across the street and he sees these kids playing all the time, no masculine figure around them at all. And children need a balance, right? And he makes it his business to spend time with those kids. That's movement. That is what you don't see every day when you're looking at Black Lives Matter movement. But we are still shunned, okay? When we talk about grants and things like that, that's a big issue. Because we need money to do this work, but we ask for money to do this work. People are like, they're unruly. They cause trouble. We don't want to, be associated with them. You don't want to be associated with us when we're in the streets fighting. But when we get nominated for that fight, now you want to take pictures with us. We're still getting shunned. The difference is we still keep moving, right? So you see us, we will remain visible, but it's not because we got a bunch of friends. It's because we're going to do this because we're not looking for friends. We're looking for liberation.
Thank you. Any other thoughts to share? Good. Okay. So here's a question here. I've enabled the ability for our attendees to upvote certain questions. So here's one that popped up. It says, thank you for having this webinar. You're welcome. Can we hear your thoughts on the current debate of whether or not Willie statue should stay up?
There has been this larger movement by universities, right, to dismantle or take down these monuments, right, that point toward white supremacy. And Willie statue, for those of us who are alumni or alumnuses of Rice University, are familiar with this prominent statue in the middle of the yard there. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that question is more to address for the current undergraduates and students who are there right now. But if Rice University is doing their own research and history on the legacies of white supremacy and slavery and how William Marsh participated in white supremacy in that country, and if it is further either traumatizing or disrupting to the Black students or students or other Indigenous folks who go to Rice University, and that's something university can still consider and think about. I do see that Rice has made many moves by establishing a new vice provost, for instance, who's looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm sure these are matters that are be taken up. But I think all universities need to do a deep dive into the histories and how Black bodies especially has helped shape, informed, and build these institutions in many respects. And also ought to consider how these symbols and signs and statues continue to convey Black and also other Indigenous populations' oppression. And if so, they need to remove them. Yeah.
I would
So
just, go.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
So for me, the thing is that, and we've encountered this in the city of Houston when we went and protested for the removal of the Confederate statue in Sam Houston Park. These monuments are reflective of the values of the city and entity in which they are in. So that is my response in terms of thinking about the maintenance of these symbols, is that it's indicative of your values at this moment and what your values are going forward. Because history is going to be in the books and is in the books. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be on display unless you are intending for it to be on display as being indicative of your values.
I would say that this is a prime example of how white supremacy works, how it moves, how it operates in America, and how it normalizes white supremacy, right? So if you're a white supremacist, you get a statue at one of the most amazing higher institutions of higher education we have in this state, arguably this country. Having these types of statues is celebrating the trauma of Black people, and you cannot celebrate what causes me pain and then tell me that you're my ally. That those things are not, they're not on the same field here, right? How many institutions of higher education have actually come out and denounced Ted Cruz as a traitor, the traitor that he is, right? This is politics. This is policy making. These are our future thought leaders and decision makers. So if I've got a young, brilliant Black mind that has to walk past that statue every single day he or she goes to class, they go to class, they are becoming normalized to the presence of white supremacy all around them, even in spaces that are supposed to teach us to think beyond and outside the box. So if we're serious about eradicating white supremacy, then these are things that must be done. And excuses of why these statues and these tributes and things like that should stay in place are really just excuses to maintain white supremacist ideology. It goes in all ways. When little white kids see these statues, you know what they think? If I'm like that guy, I get a statue in the park. Having a park named after Sam Houston in the first place is a problem. You know, you truly want equity. You truly want to be an ally of Black lives. These are things that we shouldn't even have to discuss. You know damn well you need to take down these statues of these racist slave owners, you know, reform the police. How are you going to reform the Fraternal Order of Slave Catchers? Like, start thinking about these things. You know, and you don't need validation from Black people to tell you this is wrong. You know it's wrong. That's why you're asking. So do something about it besides ask Black people what should be done. Take the statues down, fight for that. White people have to work on white people. This is one of the ways white people can work on white people. This is one of the ways that white people can dismantle white supremacy. So that's how I feel about it. Get rid of all of them. There is no Hitler High in Germany, okay?
Okay. Another question reads, how do you personally view the paradox of celebrating Kamala Harris as the first female and Black US VP, while also recognizing and calling out the years she has spent enforcing laws that helped perpetuate the mass incarceration of Black people?
Let's talk about Joe Biden.
Same time. go for it, sis.
You know what I'm saying? You want to talk about this sister. First of all, we're not a monolith, okay? And I can recognize the problems in my own house, and I can clean up my own house. Let's talk about Joe Biden. You want to talk about reconciling people's past behaviors. Once again, let's look back at how white supremacy works. You want to reconcile people's past behaviors with electing them into office? Joe Biden still thinks marijuana is a gateway drug. Joe Biden is still 100% pro-cop. Joe Biden disrespected a Black woman on national TV in front of her parents. Joe Biden is the inception of busing. He promoted it. Joe Biden called white supremacists in Congress his friends. You want to talk about something? Let's talk about the white man. Leave that sister alone for a second. We'll work on her. We're talking about white supremacy and the way white supremacy works in this country. So we're not going to talk about Kamala today, but we can talk about that white man. Let's talk about that Joe Biden and his history. That's just how I feel about it. I'm real tired. I'm real tired of people trying to say, but what about that Black person? This is how this is why we're in this conversation right now, because there is no equivalence to what happened on January 6th to the Black Lives Matter movement. It is disingenuous to try to even, parallel them. So let's get down to it. Y'all want to have this conversation? Let's have this conversation. We ain't talking about what Black people did wrong. Let's talk about white supremacy, and let's talk about it in truth. Let's talk about Joe Biden. Yeah, we ain't picking on no Black girls today.
Yeah.
Any other reflections?
Yeah, so what I add to the conversation as it relates to the difference between representational politics, right? And how does representation really account for the really policy and social issues that Black folks face each day and day? And another issue I think I saw in the question and answer about tokenism as well. There is a paradox there, right? We talked about these intramural things that happen in Black communities. What one vision represents, we do. Most folks in the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, Kandice has expressed, I think quite powerfully how, by and large, Black Lives Matter is not so much concerned about, does not really jive much with electoral politics as it does about the politics of the people in these neighborhoods and these streets, right? On the one hand, it is a good thing that people are celebrating a Black woman representationally, now in office, never been there before. So we shouldn't castigate or get upset about people who want to celebrate that, but also understand why there's a tension in the Black community, right? Because on the other hand, we want to say, don't get so excited about representational politics. Obama, for instance, yeah, he was great that he got elected, he's the first president, but also why is it that the Black Lives Matter movement really emerges during his presidency, right? And so at the same time, we got to recognize while there has been undeniable sort of progress as it relates to some policies in this country, also representational politics, electoral politics, it does not, by and large, diminish the kind of need for organic community-based movements that press against these politicians. Because while on the one hand, we might celebrate, yes, that's my sister, I'm glad to see her. At the same time, we'll be in the sister's face saying, but you need to do a lot more to help these Black communities, because what you're doing is still enforcing a type of regime that's really beating down Black bodies. And that's the kind of difference we have here. In organizations, for instance, there are these big words about diversity, equity, inclusion. And what a lot of stuff happens is organizations want to be more diverse and represent like they care more about different constituencies of bodies, but they don't want to include Black folks. How then do I alleviate this tokenism desire then? Then make Black people the center of who makes those decisions and how they're convening with these communities. The problem with these tropes of unity is we want folks to be unified to how we see how we should go, to our vision of how we should progress and go forward. We're not that comfortable with cultural differences. And for institutional arrangements, whether they be academia, whether they be churches, whether they be whatever, we have to be willing to say, hey, how do we bring different kind of bodies into these spaces to help us make decisions and also create the programs on which we move? So these are some of the challenges there. So I agree with Candace. We're not, in the Black community, we're not mad at Kamala for doing what she got to do. We're glad she's there. At the same time, we have a strong critique against the state in general and what politics represents for Black communities.
The only thing that I would want to add is just in general, we need to remember the paradigm when it comes to elected officials. These are elected employees. They work for us. And I think that we need to get away from constantly feeling that we need to be deferential to people that we put into power. We have to remember that paradigm. So Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, glad that you're there, because the Orange Menace was a menace. And I'm glad that menace is gone. But at the same time, we are still going to hold you accountable for the things that you say and the ways that you operate. Because, as the other panelists have mentioned, you can have facial representation and still be an agent of white supremacy based off of the ways that you operate. And that's the key thing, is that if you're going to be in these positions of power, use your position of power to dismantle these systems and not reaffirm these systems just because you want to secure the bag and stay in the position. If you're really
Right.
about it, you're going to make the change while being in that position. And that's what I'm waiting to see what Kamala Harris is going to do, because she has the ability to do that. And she'll either put up or she won't. And then we'll
Right.
see what happens.
And I do think that there is definitely a conversation that needs to be had, about our elected employees, no matter what color they are and what they actually do for and in our communities. That is definitely a conversation that needs to be had, because just like there are neoliberals, there are also Negro liberals. And that's important for us to be able to distinguish and within our community. But once again, that is a conversation that the Black community needs to have about our leaders. And that conversation needs to be led by like regular everyday people, because regular everyday people are the ones that are getting hit hardest by these policies, issues that are coming down from legislative bodies. But in regards to white supremacy, we gonna handle white people. Black people, our community, we'll talk about Kamala and we'll let you know what we came up with, but that's not a conversation that you should be leading or privy to, actually.
Thank you so much. Question here from Joy. What would you tell people that keep stressing that the insurrection was patriotic?
I don't talk to people like that. That's an insult on my Blackness. And, I can shield myself from certain things. That's one of them. So if there are people out there that think that this was an act of patriotism, I'm subject to agree with them looking at the way this history of America works. I am subject to believe them that this is an act of patriotism and an act to maintain white supremacy in this country. Was built on it. My ancestors didn't come here because they wanted to. We didn't emigrate to this country, so yeah, maybe they are patriots. Are we going to tolerate it? Hell no. I'm tired of tolerating American patriotism. So.
Any other reflections? Okay. Time flies, everyone. Time really flies. There's so many great questions. I'm so sorry we didn't get to address many of them, but I wanted to end with some final reflections from the panelists. If you have any final thoughts or any expressions you'd like to share as we wrap things up.
So I'm happy to start. First off, I want to say to anyone who we weren't able to get to your questions, you can always feel free to contact us. For Black Lives Matter, you can email us at blmhou@gmail.com, and we are always happy to have these conversations. My final reflections are once again this. If you were bothered by what you saw on January 6th, it is incumbent upon you to take action. And taking action can look in a variety of different ways. There is no one way to be an activist. There's no one way to be a part of this movement. But you have to take action. That can be as simple as making sure that the places and spaces that you are in are equitable and fully inclusive of all people. One of the questions that I saw in there was from a professor asking, what can they do? Ask your Black students, what do you need for me to be supportive? And then act accordingly. And make sure it is from an authentic place, that this is not performative. Because we've seen so many performative actions where you come to the protests, you take the selfie, you upload it, you say Black Lives Matter, and then that's where it ends. We are done with performances. What we need is authentic accompliceship. And what I mean by that is the time for allyship is over. Allyship is weak. Allyship is saying, oh, I'm here for you. But when the actual mess happens, you're not there with the broom helping me clean up. You're over there having brunch or a party or whatever, but leaving me and the rest of us who have to deal with this to clean it up. The accomplice is like, where's the broom? What do you need from me to make sure that we don't have this mess the next go round? So what I encourage and want to leave with every single one of you is be an accomplice. Be active in this work. Think about what needs to be done at this institution, in your home, in your communities, everywhere, to truly make Black Lives Matter in every single sphere. That's what you can do.
Thank you. Being an authentic accomplice. Okay. Any other final reflections?
First, I'd like to say thanks for holding this space. I think that these conversations are very important, and I'm glad to be a part of it. I would say things that I would like to leave this group with. First of all, I am excited about millennials and Gen Zers. Excuse my language, but you guys don't give a damn. Y'all are coming forward, and that's exciting. And I appreciate that. I think that that's something that my generation didn't do. And that's one of the reasons we got it wrong. I can admit, hey, we got it wrong. But I'm rooting for y'all 110%. I'm very excited about this generation. I do also want to say, please keep in mind that Trump did not create white supremacy. White supremacy created Trump. And if you think about that in the right way, what came before the other, then I think that will help everyone pursue a genuine path to dismantling white supremacy, and white supremacy must be dismantled. I think also that people need to understand that what we say as Black people is what it is. When we say defund the police, we ain't talking about police reform. There is no reforming the Fraternal Order of Slave Catchers. You cannot reform that. When we talk about what makes us safe in our communities, that's a conversation you should listen to, and not for the rebuttal, but for information, for clarity. There's a reason that we are calling to defund the police. A 9-year-old Black girl just got pepper sprayed while she was handcuffed in the back of a car. While a grown woman, a traitor, a treasonous grown woman, was just sent home with her mother after she was arraigned by the judge from January 6th. You know, you have to look at those types of things. You know, is this okay? Don't ask me if it's okay. You have that answer within you. So you need to answer those things for yourself. When Brandon says be an accomplice, that's exactly what we mean. I'm on that no new friends thing. I need people that are going to get in the trenches with us. We deserve the truth. We deserve people not only that are going to stand and say it. We got plenty of people that are doing that. We need action, right? Accomplice, that's action. That's not talking about it. Stop talking about it. Do something. Do something about it. I also want to just say for 1 second, we need to be careful about how we compare racial issues in this country. Comparing the movement with what happened on January 6th is a disservice to Black people, because we are fighting for our lives. We're fighting for justice. We're fighting for equity. We're fighting to abolish police brutality. We're not mad because we lost. We are losing our very lives. And we're fighting to turn that around. That's movement. What happened on January 6th is white supremacy. It's a mob. And it's not the first time. It won't be the last time. There's not a time in my life that I don't remember Black people being brutalized and being murdered, mistreated by cops and by white supremacy. That is my truth. That is my Black history. And it should stop here. So if you want to do something, unpack your own stuff and unpack what you're thinking, what you're believing, what your upbringing. Unpack how all of those things lead to the continuation of white supremacy. Start with you. And I mean Black people too, okay? Because we've had this shoved down our throats all of our lives, right? And some of us start to believe it. Some of us start to buy into it. And I just want to tell every Black person that can hear this, that meets the sound of my voice, you are not responsible for this. This is not your baggage to carry. White supremacy is not yours to dismantle. And so instead of allowing those hateful words and these biases, these practices in all institutions to weigh you down, this is where the conversation for unity comes. Because I got you. You hear me, little Black girl? This Black woman right here, I've got you. You and I need to talk about unity so I can make sure you're okay. And I love you. I want to definitely leave with these words. Black person, I love you dearly.
Thank you so much. Dr. Tinsley, would you like to share anything?
Well, in keeping with the tactics and strategy of the movement, it's hard for me to follow. So I just kind of leave it at there and let her have the last word.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions. To the panelists, Mr. Mack, Ms. Webber, and Dr. Tinsley. We appreciate each of your deep reflections on this topic. For our attendees, I did drop a link for you to visit our evaluation page. It takes less than 90 seconds. Feel free to share your feedback on what you've gained from today's session or today's program rather. Please look out for more programs this semester from the MultiCultural Center. And thank you so much for joining in today. Hopefully you've taken some action point that you could implement in your own life. So please be safe and have a fruitful week.